What's up, and welcome to episode 2 of season 7 of the Drone to 1K podcast. I'm your host, David Young, here with a quick intro. A couple things that we like to do in the intro. Number one is give you a unique discount to a Drone Launch Academy course or workshop. Last week, we gave you one of our $50, mini courses called Drones 101. Gave that to you for just $1. Actually, by the time we release this podcast on Tuesday, we're actually putting our regular Drone to 1K course on sale. So we have the Drone to 1K podcast. We have a course made with some of the podcast guests in the past on how to actually go about and build a drone business from scratch and get it to at least $1,000 a month and hopefully beyond. So the course is called Drone to 1K. And we're doing $300 off of that course from today when the podcast is released, which will be a Tuesday. The promo will actually go to our email list and it'll end on Friday. If you're listening to this podcast, I'll leave it open for the full week. So it'll end Monday at midnight Eastern time. So a week from when the podcast is released. Normally that course is like $800, I think, $799. And for the people that get in on this round, we're actually going to expand the course content a bit. We're going to add some sections on how to do cold email outbound outreach. So that way, a lot of people don't like, talking to strangers, cold calling, maybe aren't good at networking yet. Just another channel that you can add into your outreach efforts to bring in customers. So how to do it in a way that's not going to be like scammy. You're not really like spamming people. We'll give you good templates and resources, but we're actually going to teach that part live, me and Cody Retlick. He's one of the instructors in there. He's also been on this podcast several times. So everybody who signs up in this round is going to be able to do like 4 live classes with us where we can actually use your business and coach you guys through the process of doing cold email outreach to grow your drone business. So that we get like personalized attention and we'll kind of coach you through it. And then we'll later turn that into permanent course content. So that's the deal with that one. Also, if you want to get a free Drone Launch Academy t-shirt, you can take the time to leave an honest review. Tell us what you really think. Give it whatever you want. 1 star, 5 stars. Just go to Drone to 1K on Apple Podcasts is where we have most of our reviews. Leave a review, screenshot it, email it to support@dronelaunchacademy.com, and we will get you a free shirt as a thank you for taking the time to do that. Okay, today is Matt Nugent from Wingwalker Aerial. Loved this show today. Matt is in law enforcement and started learning how to use drones there for accident scene reconstruction using photogrammetry. Thought that was pretty neat. Did that for a while. Then he turned that into a side business. And now he's making consistent $5,000 a month on the side with drones. He even had 1 month where he made a lot more than that, but I'll let you find out how much in the podcast episode. Pretty cool stuff. You're going to hear about how he offered one service and then that company totally brought it in-house and wiped him out. And he had to kind of think on his feet and be creative. So I was really impressed by him and what he'd been able to do on the side with the drone business. It was very encouraging to hear. Hope you enjoy the show and take some notes. Welcome everyone back to another episode of the Drone to 1K podcast. I'm your host, David Young. Today I have with me Matt Nugent of Wingwalker Aerial Photography. Thanks, Matt, for jumping on here with me.
Yep. Thanks for having me, David. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Matt, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background and maybe start off with just how you got into drones in the first place?
I didn't seek drones out. Drones kind of sought me out. So to give you just a little bit of background and fill you in on who I am is, I've wanted to be a police officer my entire life. And in 2015, I got to fulfill that kind of lifelong dream. And so became a police officer up here. I'm based out of the Seattle, Washington area. So I work within that region. And I'd been on for a couple of years and I get asked about attending like this basic pilot drone class. And it was going to be 40 hours. It was free. It was taught by my agency. And they were just like, hey, we really need people to get into this. And I actually was pretty hesitant about even going into it. I'm probably less traditional in the drone world in the sense that I'm not a gamer. I just kind of didn't think that I would be very good at flying drones what was my honest opinion. I was like, that's going to probably be way too difficult to learn. Only people that, game or do those kind of things would be good at it. And that was just, I was a little naive. So
and you're like, oh, they kind of fly themselves,
Yeah. Yeah, they really do. So I joined this class reluctantly. And next thing you know, I'm able to figure it out. We have implemented drones in almost every division within my agency. It's pretty cool to see. I mean, that was 7 years ago now, and I can tell you all about how drones have really been an everyday thing for me now.
Cool. So you implemented them at your like in your police job. Did you transition that into the business that you have now, or tell us a little about how that worked?
Yeah. So a few years go by. I really didn't have any intention of creating a business at that point. I was just kind of doing what I did at my agency and loved it. And then I get this phone call from a friend who's like, "Hey, I can't get my drone off the ground." He's like trying to figure it out. Calls me up and I just offered to help him. And so he was like, "Hey, I could really use some footage around town, like a town reel." He's a real estate agent to this day and a developer. And he had just asked, "Can you go and get some footage? I would love to put it on my website." And I was like,
Okay.
"Sure." And that did not go so smooth.
What happened?
Mind you, public safety is not cinematic drone footage. It is
Sure.
rough. It is
Yeah.
get there, rough movements. It did not look good when it's being filmed and you're using it for footage. It's just not the same thing. It did not
Yeah.
transition well. So he was like, he's being a good friend, but he's also being honest with me, which is actually the best thing you can do
I
to a
was gonna
friend
say,
is,
very good
"Hey
friend. Yeah.
man, these some of these are good, some of these need some work." And I was like, "Crap, what do I do now?" And I had bought this drone because I didn't
O
own a personal one yet. I was using my agencies, and when he had asked me to help him, I had to go get a personal drone because they
okay.
don't want those
Yeah,
to.
sure. What kind of drone did you buy? And, like, what year was this?
So this was in 2020,
Okay.
and I bought at the time. I don't think Costco does this anymore, but at the time, Costco sold like this DJI Air 2, I think
Okay.
that was my first drone. It was relatively inexpensive, but at the time, it felt like it was just going to be money I was probably never going to see again, is what
Yeah.
I thought.
Okay.
So I go out and get this DJI Air 2, fly this town reel, and it didn't look good.
This was just something you were doing as a favor, or was he gonna offer to pay you for it?
I think the plan was that if it was usable, he would pay. And this is not a plug to Drone Launch Academy. I am not compensated for this by any means, but
Oh
what I
gosh.
did,
That
no joke, is I went and I started looking around as to how can I get my footage? Like I can fly a drone, but just because you know how to fly a drone does not necessarily mean it transfers well into, having this perfect cinematic
yeah.
footage. So I started looking around, Drone Launch Academy popped up. It was Alex Harris's A to Z drone photography class,
Mhm.
and it's self-paced. It was kind of the perfect thing for me to just dive into.
Mhm.
And I completed it in a relatively quick time frame. I mean, I'm a family man, so I'm busy on so many different levels of my life, but I went through it, took me a few weeks, and then I applied that in the practice. And now I go back to my friend, fly this new town reel. First cut of it, he was like approved, put it right on his website. And
Oh, sweet.
I was like, man, I went from thinking I knew what I was doing to getting this information, applying it to practice, and he loved it. I mean, it was no revisions after that. It was just, all right, I'm good.
Sweet.
So I was happy
And
about that.
so did that is that what kicked off the business, or what'd that do for you?
So I didn't make it a formal business yet, but I just kind of helped them out. He actually shared an office with this big developer out of our area.
Okay.
And once we did that, he was like, "Well, I'll pass your number along to this." He's literally was in the same office as this developer. And they ended up saying, "Hey, we would really like drone footage of some of our developments that they were doing in the Seattle area." And they said, "Hey, can you go out, fly a drone up to certain levels where we think the first floor windows would be, the second floor windows, and then in Seattle, we have a lot of these new developments where they're building these rooftop decks." And
Okay.
they just wanted to know if they built these houses, could they have a view of anything? Could they have a view of the lake? We have lots of lakes, mountains, obviously city skylines that are beautiful up
Yeah.
here. And they just wanted to know. They were like, if we're going to
Hmm.
invest all this money, they wanted to
Interesting.
know what views they could get. Cause if you have views, I mean, that relates to money to them for their
Yeah.
deal.
Interesting. It's the first time I've heard of someone using drone to be like, "What is the view from here if we built a building here?"
Yeah. And they would
Yeah.
give me exact measurements. And it was funny because the first time we did it, it was a little clunky because I had to do like a 360 video, and it takes a lot of storage to do that. So and they gave me exact measurements like, hey, fly it at 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, and do the spin. And then, I mean, that's really all they needed. I was spending probably 15 minutes at a site to get those, and it was paying a few $100 per site just to do that.
Sweet. Oh,
And
this is like multiple sites you're doing this at?
about 150 sites.
Whoa,
Yeah.
150. I
Yeah.
thought it was just like, go out and do this one.
No, it was 100, well, not in one day, obviously. It was,
Yeah, yeah,
150
yeah.
sites over the year, but I mean,
Wow,
it really I was fortunate enough to just by doing one job, it led me to a referral that led me to 150 jobs. It was a really good year. Yeah.
that's awesome. Tell me a little bit about what does your business look like today? Like, what are you doing with it today?
Yeah. Actually, this month marks kind of 4 years doing it. About 3 year in April of 2021 was when I got a business license in the state of Washington and
Okay.
became kind of a business, because that was when that developer had called and I was like, I should try to look as legitimate as I can, because
Yeah, right.
I didn't want to favors is one thing for a friend, and
Sure.
that worked. But when it was this big developer who needed, you could do stuff as a contractor, obviously, and
Yeah.
provide a W-9 and all that. But I think the important thing was I just wanted it to be as official as I could,
Yeah, like
because
you're
fake it till you
professional. Yeah.
make it. Right. So I actually had started everything. I got this PO box to have an address, and I was like, man, I'm never going to use this. But that's what I thought. I was like, I had no idea what it was going to turn into. And so today it is still a part-time gig for me, but it's been really good. My business today really is developed into photogrammetry and mapping, which is really a passion of mine. I still do a little bit of work with the potential views and that kind of thing. We've evolved that to doing 360-degree panoramas.
Okay.
And there's a company that offers, basically you upload your panorama images to this website, and then it displays them so that you can send a link to the client, and you kind of create this virtual tour, if you will,
Yep.
like
Okay.
a tour that you would see on the ground for, I think it's like Matterport
Yep.
for ground stuff. It's teleportme.com, and you upload your panoramas and you basically create this virtual tour, and the client can go in, click around. And so now that takes from doing those 360 videos to just being these
Mm.
panoramas that the client can zoom in,
Probably
move
better for
around.
them.
It's way easier, less storage. It's quicker for me. Everything has gone really well with that. My real passion has been photogrammetry and mapping, because, I've run these parallel paths of having a full-time job as a police officer, but also running a business. In my full-time job, I've evolved into becoming like a crime scene reconstructionist, utilizing drones for mapping and photogrammetry. So I paralleled that, and my business is really, I love doing photogrammetry for businesses and creating digital twins.
So with photogrammetry, I'm curious, like right now, is that something you're like trying to get into or you do a lot of that work now?
I mean, I do it right now. I have a civil engineer I work with, along with
Okay.
other clients, developers. The engineer is the one who's been the most consistent. I mean,
Yep.
multiple projects a month. He is trying to get the topographical data from photogrammetry, and he's then creating plans and developing permits and just getting things signed off. And you really, running a drone business, you run that the line, especially in Washington State, where I'm not a licensed surveyor. You walk the line of being a licensed surveyor, and you want to be careful how you advertise or publish any data. It really, my job is to collect the data and capture it,
Mhm.
and then provide it to like a civil engineer or a licensed surveyor.
Yeah. Okay. People are, don't hold yourself out to be a surveyor because there's a lot of like liability and stuff that comes with that
Right.
too.
Right.
If you're trying to say, hey, here are these official spots, right? So I'm curious when you're working with the civil engineers, they care about like tying into like control points and coordinate systems and all that stuff too.
Right. Yeah. There's a level of precision that needs to be obtained. My setup right now is going to be the DJI Mavic 3 Enterprise with RTK
Nice.
capability. And then you have ground control points. So, I tie those in and measure and do all my thing there. But that's been my setup so far. And I really want to get to that next level. So I'm looking at the GPS rovers and tying those kind of things in. I think photogrammetry is a fantastic use of the drone, but there are limitations with it when you're getting to that level of engineering and surveying. I feel like I'm in this kind of this window of, if I need to get to that and advertise that level of precision, then I think the next best thing is LiDAR, and you have to have quite a bit of a ground setup too, with ground control points and
Well,
rovers and base
that's what I
stations.
was going to ask. A couple questions. In full disclosure, we just finished filming a bunch of new courses on mapping. So I've been nerding out on it the last like 2 months and stuff. So I'm like real into it now. Because basically I go fly around and do these courses with other experts. So basically like, I'm, learning all this stuff too, like the more advanced stuff. With the ground control points are the engineering firm, do they have their own survey teams, like, shooting those ground control points and getting the coordinates, and they provide them to you, or are they expecting you to go out there and do that?
It's kind of a little bit of both. So my understanding, the survey's already been done, and I'm just bringing some more topographical
I see.
information. My
Okay.
my ultimate goal is to be able to kind of do the dirty work. Surveyors have to go out in all this heavy vegetation or treacherous areas for the middle part. Obviously, a surveyor still has to do these boundaries
Yep.
and shooting the property lines. Like
Yep.
that's just a given. And they do the middle stuff to get the topo. Like if you're doing a full topo survey, you still have to go out and get that. It's a ton of work, especially for big sites or treacherous areas or vegetation. They're climbing through blackberry bushes. They're doing all this stuff. My
Yeah.
goal is to just augment. Like I just want to go out, fly the drone with lidar, and provide that kind of data where that can be tied in together. And yes, you have to have ground control points. You have to utilize their monuments and what they've done and then tie it
Yeah.
all together.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was curious about. Cool. So with this engineer, it sounds like you're mostly doing sort of like, hey, we're about to develop this or do something to it, and we want to get the surface like as is now so we can sort of do our designs off of it. Is that what they're doing?
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's like in a feasibility or if it's just preliminary data.
Yeah.
Because a full survey ends up getting done. I'm just more
Yeah.
going in and trying to do this in a way that is the most efficient way possible. I mean, surveys are so expensive up here. I don't know how they are across the country, but
It's they're expensive. Yeah.
yeah,
Like the manpower involved is a lot, you know.
yeah. And I mean, the drone is once you get in it and once you invest a little bit into the equipment, man, it goes super quick. It's super accurate data, especially when you add the RTK. And if you're
Yep.
not using RTK, then just more heavy on the ground control points. And I
Yep.
mean, that's a great setup.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I'm curious with the civil engineer, you said that they're like you're doing like a pretty good steady stream of jobs just on the side. How does that work out schedule wise with like your full-time job?
So I work kind of 4 days a week as a full-time job, 4 10-hour shifts. And then I have 1 day a week where I can go out and capture data. The drone business is a part-time thing. But when I can go out and capture a map, a photogrammetry map and usually under an hour. I mean,
Yep.
if I'm there for over an hour, it's probably something that I'm just finicking with on the equipment, like getting
Yeah.
a better RTK signal or something like that. But usually I'm in and out under an hour, and that's getting a photogrammetry map to create both 2D and 3D models, but also maybe some video and photos, just because it's an extra. It's like one of those things that it doesn't take very long, and clients love to see when you kind of piece like a whole package together.
Sure. You're in the
Um,
air already, so yeah.
yeah, it's just, I mean, and a family. So I try to keep my weekends as open as I can.
Mhm.
And then, you know, as much as the wife will let me go out and do all this stuff. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
she's the same. She gets just as much credit as I do for this because she's always, she's stay at home now. We're able to make that work. And
Cool.
um it's been amazing. And it's a grind. I won't say it's easy by any means. It's a long
Yeah, 2
day. And
jobs. But yeah, I'm curious, are you comfortable sharing, like, what level of business you're doing now revenue-wise with the side business?
yeah, right now I'm probably averaging, I would say the minimum I'm making on the side is about 5,000 per month. I think that's usually just the standard that I can expect. And then it can go up from there.
What's, like, your
I
best month ever?
last month.
What was it? Come on, tell us.
So last month this is an, in 4 years, this is kind of I would say it's unusual, but I
Sure.
had a
Yeah, yeah,
client.
yeah.
He goes, I got 380 acres to map and I need you
Okay.
to do it. And last month I booked $20,000 in drone service.
Nicely done, man.
So I mean, I don't know if that'll ever happen again. And I'm not
I'm hearing
I
some
know,
recurring themes in this conversation of be like, "I set up a PO box. I thought I'd never
yeah,
use it.
yeah,
I did this. I thought this would never go anywhere."
yeah.
So, man, that's awesome, dude. Congratulations. That's sick.
Thank you. It was extraordinary for sure. I'm really happy
That's
though. Really happy.
That's great. That's great. Awesome to hear, like, what you're doing now. Oh, let's rewind a little bit. I wanna hear some of the background. So you got into you're doing drones with the police department stuff. You learn a little bit more about, videography, make that a little bit better. Was it that time that you were learning? Because if you're doing crime scene documentation 3D models, like, they must have taught you about photogrammetry and how that works, or did you just figure that out on your own?
So it evolved over time. I mean, you have to remember before drones in the police department, and let's say we go to this really bad crash, like a
Yeah.
serious injury crash is what typically we would utilize drones for, or like not serious injury in the sense that it really has to lead to let's say just the worst outcome, like a fatality collision,
Sure.
and we'll go out and process it just a little bit further.
Sure.
But we used to get on ladder trucks, like a fire truck would come out and they would extend their ladder, and you would have to go up with a DSLR camera and take a photo overhead and then come back down. And that was
Okay.
your overhead photo. So obviously drones came in and you would initially it was just to take photos.
Mhm.
And then, so I was out when we first kind of got these going. We didn't realize photogrammetry was an option. I mean, we were flying a drone that just had a GoPro attached to it, and it was I don't even remember the name of the drone. It
Like
was
Karma or something? Was it
yeah, I mean,
literally GoPro? Because they had their own, like, I forget the name of it. It didn't do very well after a long time.
yeah, it's kind of like a
Uh,
monument now in our office. It's just it
yeah,
sits
yeah.
up there as the
Yeah, the
first
GoPro
generation.
Karma was their,
Yeah.
yeah, they abandoned that after a little while. Alright, so you had just the photos, and then how'd that progress?
Well, so I was out there doing we would had a total station. I mean, we would do everything on the ground like surveyors do. And obviously you don't need the surveyor license in the sense that we're capturing just point to point. We're not publishing
Sure.
any data. We're just
Yeah.
simply utilizing it to reconstruct a crash
Mhm.
or some other crime scene. So we would go out there and I mean, you're out there for hours and hours and hours, and we would have roads closed down, and you're utilizing a lot of manpower to be out there just incurring all this overtime. And so I had a supervisor at the time. He really was the pioneer for us to really try to implement how can drones help make this. So really the credit goes to him on that. And he was trying to figure this out. And so eventually we found out about photogrammetry, and I think we used Pix 4D.
Yep.
So we'd go out and just set an automated mission. It was just, really to get an ortho mosaic.
Mhm.
And that was enough at first. And then that really, obviously that just kind of continued to evolve. And now we're making 3D models. We're flying at night. We were able to figure out how to do photogrammetry at night with sufficient
Really?
lighting.
Does it say you to
Um,
light up the scene or something?
yeah. And you can't do automated missions at night is what we
Mm,
found out. So we would
interesting.
go
I've
out
never
and
tried
do,
to map at night. I've never even thought of it. But I guess in
yeah,
your it's if there's a crash at night, you kinda
you
that's where
have
you're
to.
at.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, most of our call outs for bad crashes typically occur at night. I would say more often than not, it's at
Yeah.
night. And so what we used to do is we would, you'd shut down the roadway and you'd have this huge scene. We would take ground photos. We would do all of our measurements. We had to do the total station because we assumed that drone was not applicable at nighttime. So we
Mhm.
kind of ruled it out. So we'd capture all these measurements. We had daytime figured out, just not night. And so we do all this, get all the cars out of the way, reopen the scene, leave, come back the next day, close down the roads again, and then we would fly it with the drone. Well, the problem is that the cars are gone. It's not the same scene. It's daytime now, and we were trying to figure that out. And so I attended a conference, a national conference for drone through the Law Enforcement Drone Association, just an amazing nonprofit organization that is just to help public safety members get
Cool.
better.
Yeah.
And I connected with another investigator out of a different state. And he was like, hey, here's what we do. We went out and practiced, and I brought it back to my agency. And now we're doing everything at night. We don't have to reclose the roads now and the daytime, affecting traffic again or utilizing overtime for personnel to be there. We're doing it more efficiently now and at night, and it turns out really amazing. When you provide sufficient lighting to a scene, we use
Yeah.
stanchion lights, and then you just take manual photos. We kept trying to do the automated flight routes, and it will never work.
'Cause you can't reconstruct because it's too much. So when you're doing manual, I'm assuming do you guys care about 3D, or are you just trying to do sort of like 2D measurements? Or are you trying to make like a 3D model of the scene?
Both, yeah. We have a tertiary software that we will bring, like our photogrammetry models will then be exported, like say in a LAS file or
Mhm.
OBJ, and then we'll put it out into another software that we then reconstruct everything. So we're looking to get 2D and 3D models out of our
Okay.
night scenes.
So what's that collection process look like at night? You just like flying around snapping as many sort of overlapping photos as you can from different angles? Or there's any sort of like, SOP for it?
So we train to do nadir photos overhead, back and forth. And then I do 3 orbits. So one at full elevation of whatever we did the nadir images at. So say 150 feet. And then we do an orbit at 150 feet. But now the gimbal is oblique. So you're doing whatever you can get the scene in
Like,
frame of. So
sure.
75 degrees or something.
Yeah.
And then I do a second orbit at half elevation. So 150 down to 75, do another orbit and whatever your gimbal angle is to just keep that scene in frame. And then I do a third orbit, kind of as low as the scene will allow.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's at the roof of cars, and that's where you get that really good detail
Yeah.
of license plates and different parts of the damage to the cars. I keep using crashes as an example because it's the easiest. It's the easiest one, but we have scenes that we do of all sorts of different varieties. And then I do what's called stitching. And I don't know if that's obviously not a technical term, but where we just take photos every 10 feet from full elevation all the way down to the ground from like basically all 4 cardinal directions. And
Okay.
that just
Yeah.
kind of helps bring all the different elevations kind of into one
Yeah.
model.
Yeah.
So I don't know if
I've
that's
heard some people
practical.
call that. Yeah. I talked to other people who like bridge inspections or even like building facade inspections. Sometimes if you're getting different angles, sometimes the software gets like confused. So it's nice to have sort of those connecting tissue, if you will. He calls it, I think, like layering or something, but
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
same kind of principle. Yeah,
Yeah.
really interesting. That's cool. So you learned that over there. I'm assuming did that help you? I'm curious about your transition on the business side from doing more sounds like cinematography type of work. Like what made you first go, oh, you know, I can do this photogrammetry stuff.
Yeah, it was kind of more trial and error. I mean, you learn a lot when you're running a business and what works and doesn't work. I would say that, I started out trying to saturate or trying to get into real estate and the listings and marketing. And I found out that a lot of photographers just, I don't know if they're all FAA licensed, but a lot of photographers now who are doing the ground stuff throw the drone up and
Yeah,
get a couple photos. And I was like, well, if a real estate agent can call one person and get the job done, that's what they're going to do.
yeah,
Um,
that's the trend I've seen.
so I just kind of felt like that market was saturated. I didn't think that I could really get into that market without getting into ground photography as well. I really wanted to focus on the business being solely drone based, only because that's what I felt comfortable with. That's what I felt like I could do well. And you kind of have to find a niche. Is at least advice that I'd received in the past is like find something that you really enjoy doing and really like doing and follow that. I still do photography and videography. It's not really for house listings. It's usually like construction or development where they want that kind of stuff. Usually it's recurring too. You can come back and check on progress, and I love that
Yeah,
stuff. But
yeah,
photogrammetry is something that I think the biggest obstacle I face as a business owner with photogrammetry is that there's not a lot of clients who immediately recognize what
mhm.
photogrammetry is. I don't want to say new.
It's new in the way it is now. I mean, it's been around for a while from like in like airplanes and usually only used by like city or county GIS or certain types of surveys and things like that. But yeah, it's a new concept for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that you can do it and, you still have clients that are paying for planes to go overhead of relatively small parcels. And
Yeah.
so there's just a lot of, I think the education piece of
Yeah.
making, letting clients know when especially construction or development, when they call and they're like, hey, we just need photos and video. I'm like, well, have you thought of this? And that's
Yeah.
really, maybe not to upsell them, but maybe just to try it out. And then
Yeah.
have you heard of the free to fee
Yeah.
philosophy?
Yeah. Where you like you try it out and then they're like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, this looks cool. I want this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're already having me there for photos and video, the photogrammetry model. It's not a huge time consuming thing. I want to have them try it, get the results. And then the biggest thing is the compare models, as you're making progress and you can go into, I use Drone Deploy for my business and
Okay.
you can go in and look at the different time frames. If phase one was 1 quarter and then phase two is the next and you go out, I mean, they can slide the window across and see what progress they've made. It's a super cool feature. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm curious, do you remember what your first mapping photogrammetry job was on the business side?
It went back to that developer who was having me go out and get the different views. And I said to them, how do you guys need info about how high the structures are surrounding that? Because they were so interested in the view. There's obviously residents, because this is mostly residential stuff that
Hmm.
they were having me go. There's residential developments. So they would have, obviously there's going to be houses on the side because this is in Seattle. There's not a lot of big open space. This is,
Mm.
usually it's a tear down and a rebuild. And so I offered to do photogrammetry. I did it for free to start, just said, hey, look at this. I can tell you relatively how high the structures are around. You can take that data if you want and run with it or, not. But I started introducing it and then it became kind of a regular thing. And that was kind of
Mm.
the first
Yeah.
door in.
What was their like reaction when you showed it to them the first time? Were they like, whatever, or did they really pick up on it?
Well, they do so many projects that because I started putting together a report because one of your classes that you taught had suggested. So I signed up not only for the A to Z aerial photography, but I also signed up for photogrammetry basic
Okay.
and photogrammetry advanced with Root and
Okay. Yeah.
great info. And you had suggested in your basic to put together like a report and as a deliverable and so I would just take screenshots and put all this together. And they loved the report. They wouldn't even look at the photogrammetry model that was hosted on Drone Deploy. They would just look at the report and I would put in some things and screenshots. I think that the model itself, where you can go in and manipulate, is the most powerful piece. And I would give them the
Yeah.
links.
You're sort of taking some of that mental burden off of them of having like, okay, now I've got this model. I've got to go in here and figure out how to dig in. Like if they know they need a certain question answered, like how wide is this ditch or what's the slope of this, right? They can go in there and do that. But a lot of times people just love PDFs. Like, let me just pull it up, scroll through it, see what
Yeah.
they're highlighting. So that's smart of you to do. So were you putting the building heights and things like that in this report or what kind of would you put in this report?
Yeah, I would put photos. Hey, here's the view at 10. The just scrape. Even though it was a 360, I would just take kind of like the best section on what I felt like was the best view. And sometimes
Sure.
there's not views. I wouldn't say that it was 100%, but generally there was, especially when you get to a specific height, there's usually something around here that you can see. If it's worthwhile notating, then I'll
Yeah.
kind of frame it up and then take a screenshot. Sometimes I even take direct photos from the drone. So I'll do the panorama and then switch to camera mode and just take a
Smart.
photo of it because it's such a good shot, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's a good view. So I would take those and then I would put in screenshots of what the estimated elevation was with the houses around. Can't take any measurements because again, that's back to the survey thing. But I would just give them the data and the visual and say, this is what it looks like. So is the view going to be obstructed or not? And they loved that. It was a really big thing. In fact, they loved it so much that I did a number of projects with them, and then they brought in an intern to fly drones for them full time. And
Oh, did that
so
mess you up though?
it made me have to. It was a good thing. It was a good learning lesson because I had been propelled into this business, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." You have a client who just keeps bringing you stuff. But what really made me progress as a business is like, okay, what do you do when you don't have that reoccurring client, and how do you rebuild this to make it where you are constantly getting business? And so that was a big learning lesson. I kind of felt lucky in the sense of having that one referral that just led to all this, and then next thing you know, they have a college intern who comes in and does all that for them. They didn't do the photogrammetry for him, but they did the views thing because it's a
Sure.
relatively simple thing.
Well,
But
that's a good lesson on make sure what you're providing is like, if what you're doing can be done by anyone, you won't last with it for super long.
right,
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
if it's super easy to do, anyone can do it, then what's the value, the true value, I think, learning those things that are still useful, but maybe a little bit more difficult or utilizing the background that you had and all your other experience at your full-time
Yeah.
job.
FAA licensed drone operators are being utilized over non-licensed. But again, that's that education piece. So
They just threw an intern without a drone license, like
I,
without a 107 out there?
I, I don't know. It didn't sound like it.
Yeah. I'm not gonna
But
not
yeah,
making any claims on the podcast. Gotcha. So, like, what did you do from there? Like, what was your next move?
just to continue to reach out, I cold called a few people. You're able to look up the largest land developers in the state and they rank them by, I don't remember what site I used, honestly, but it was like there's a report online that gives you the biggest land developers that have worked within my state. And I cold called a few of them and I kind of thought I'd never hear from someone. And then next thing you know, a year later, I get a call back and that was a big deal because that ended up being that related to last month's biggest month.
Hmm,
And it was just all from a random cold call of
a
like, hey,
cold
this
call a
is,
year ago.
yeah, this is Matt. I fly drones, happy to help with, and go into a little bit of the details, but just making yourself known to others. Don't expect to feel like you have to sell. I'm not a salesman. So There's probably people that are better at that and selling and closing a deal right then and there. But I'm more of the, hey, I focus on flying. I'm here if you need me. This is my business. This is my site. We have some good reviews online. That usually holds well. A year is a long time to wait. Most people probably want that stuff to happen sooner. But if you're patient, it's super rewarding in the end.
Yeah, but I mean, there's just a lot of times there's no matter what work you're doing, a lot of times you're gonna be putting in a lot of effort with little immediate reward, and it's easy to get discouraged. But again, like you don't know which one of these opportunities is gonna land or hit. So I'm sure that's pretty encouraging for people to hear like, hey, even just a casual reach out, introducing myself, paid off a year later with some pretty great stuff. So
Yeah.
it's good encouragement in your mind to be like, oh, cool. Like this is not a total waste of time to, reach out to people. Man, that's really cool. Did you want to talk about LiDAR stuff at all? Or what are your plans there?
Oh man, it's not a cheap thing to do.
No, it's not.
So there's a few people online that have really been kind of helpful in the learning process. So Indiana Drones has some good content. And then there's Pilot by, are you guys developing a LiDAR course or do you have one?
Not at the moment, but maybe in the future at some point.
Yeah. And then who else? You've had him on one of your podcasts, Daniel Wyndham from, I think he's
Oh,
Georgia.
okay. Okay.
So I'm just trying to really absorb as much content as I can. And I think the demand is there, I really feel like LiDAR is going to be the future of helping. I mean, if you want to do surveys and you want to be considered to be a serious aerial LiDAR specialist or just an aerial photogrammetry specialist, you probably need to incorporate LiDAR. And so I'm kind of at that point where I
Yeah.
want to do that.
The thing is like LiDAR was one of those things that was like so out of reach for so long because the sensors just cost so much. They were like $100,000 or whatever. But now, shocker, DJI, they've innovated a lot. And like the L2 is what, like, I
I
don't
think
know,
it's like 15,
12-ish grand. Yeah.
16.
Oh,
Yeah.
I just looked at, yeah. Yeah, somewhere like 10 to 15. And you got to obviously have a, platform to fly it on. So it's not cheap to get the full setup, right? Does open a lot more options as far as, especially if you're dealing with a lot of vegetation in the places you're flying. And again, that's another thing that's just going to set you apart. Yeah, it is a bit of a different beast. I think that's a good route to go, especially if you have a business that can support that and justify that. And it might be good to talk to your existing clients and say, hey, if I were to be able to get you better accuracy, or if I was able to make it to where your survey teams didn't have to go back out under these areas where the photogrammetry can't see, is that something
Yeah.
that, yeah, how valuable would that be in this situation? It works because there are people out there doing LiDAR and making money with LiDAR and doing jobs, right? So it's just sort of
Yeah.
what's the angle you have to take in order, what kind of customers do you need to go after?
Actually, it was the civil engineer who suggested it. He was like, "Hey, I think we have this plot. It would be really cool if you had LiDAR," because he was having to kind of adjust in photogrammetry where where the trees
Yeah, it kind of
they kind of
garbles
get
like you.
formed and wavy.
Well, yeah,
I remember.
because the way that the photogrammetry reconstruct, especially when it doesn't have much information, it starts to look kind of
Yeah.
jacked up. And then if the tree's blocking it, when you remove it, like if you like take the point cloud and you're classifying it, now you just have like a gaping hole in your
Yeah.
model that you're then trying to just connect a
Yeah.
surface on, which is not the worst, but it's not the
Yeah.
best.
Well, when you're trying to get topographical data
Yeah.
and you have those gaping, could it be corrected? Maybe. But when you're trying to establish like this huge level of precision,
Yeah.
then that's where I think of LiDAR. And I actually found a place that rents drones out
That
where
was
you
gonna be my
could,
next thing. I was like, just rent
yeah,
rent one. Yeah.
yeah. Cause I want to just start that once I feel like, hey, okay, this is something that I can do and it feels like it's obviously I know my photogrammetry process and workflow. Like I know
Mhm.
how to do that with my setup, but this is all new. And I kept kind of telling myself, oh, LiDAR, that's so far out of reach. There's probably someone that does that in our area. And, but now when you realize the cost it's still a big upfront cost,
Yeah, it is.
but it's more, like you said, it's more reachable than ever before.
Yeah,
And
it's coming down for sure. And again, the L2 is not gonna be as you hear some people say like, "Oh, it's not quite as good as some of these other sensors," like, they're like, it's one of the most affordable for sure, but it's like the amount difference it is in accuracy is much less than the price differences. You gotta pay a whole lot more to
right,
get, like, marginally better accuracy. Again, I'm not a
right.
LiDAR specialist, but just from the
Yeah.
LiDAR pro guys I talk to, that's
You're
basically been
you're you're pretty on point with that from what I've been reading at least.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But no, I would encourage it. It is different for sure. And again, this is not coming from Dave, the LiDAR specialist guy, but, it uses a lot more the way it collects data, knows where it is. It's a lot of like the telemetry data and the IMU is like a big factor in calibrating that stuff. So it's a whole different, yeah, like you said, different workflow, different things to consider when you're trying to get your good accuracy and all that. Very cool, man. Hopefully we can do another podcast in a year or two and you can tell us about your
Yeah.
booming LiDAR business.
I would love that. I just don't want it to, the purchase be something that, no one needs or wants. I would imagine it'd be utilized, but yeah, that would be great to follow
Yeah.
up.
I mean, I know people who say that like that what they do is when they get a job that like, hey, we want to do LiDAR on this, cool. And they'll say, we'll pay X for it. They just build that into their contract and they go rent the gear they need and do that for that job. And then, because especially if they're not going to use it all, because I know some people, they're like, they mostly do photogrammetry and then every once in a while they need to do a LiDAR job. So again, it's not like there's a ton of rental places out there, but I know there are places
Yeah.
that will rent
Yeah.
that stuff. Or
And
if
they
you've ever
seem to be
bought,
able to ship it to, if you don't have something local you can go pick up, seem to be able to ship it, but it's costly when you have all that gear coming up. But
yeah.
if you have the right job, you could factor that to whatever you propose.
Yep, and if you work with I don't know how it works exactly, but I've talked to some dealers that do, like, GNSS equipment, LiDAR, and photogrammetry gear. They say for their customers, they're like, "We don't advertise rentals," but, like, if they have customers and they're like, "Hey, I just need this one thing for this, 1-month period," they will oftentimes, like, work out, like, rental deals sort of that are not advertised, so if you're ever thinking about that, you could always reach out to, like, survey type dealers or different more, like, precision drone folks and, see if they consider doing that if you don't already have a relationship, so
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
yeah, cool. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. I had fun talking to you. I know a lot of people probably learned a lot on here. And if someone wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they wanted to say hey or congrats or ask you a question?
Oh yeah, I would love to hear from you. And if anybody has any questions, I'm an open book. I try to be transparent, and I really want to help other people succeed. I mean, I think that grows the industry as a whole. I haven't kept any secrets to myself. It's just this is what I do, and I want to help anybody out there that's a business or just getting started. This is just my humble opinion, but go out and buy your drone. I had kicked rocks around a little bit, just figure out if I was going to make that money back, and you absolutely will. I mean, sometimes in the first job. So go out there, buy the equipment that you need, and then get outside your comfort zone. That's how you're going to do things that sometimes you don't even realize that you're capable of doing. And the next thing you know, you're making a client super happy about the results. And that's always my favorite thing, is helping clients get to that. You're running a business, which is the biggest part of this, is you are operating a business, and yes, you provide drone services, but I think as long as you communicate well and you show up when you're going to show up and you're showing up as a business and as a person, that is probably been the biggest thing for me, is because there are a lot of great drone operators out there. I think that is a skill that I have, but there are so many really, really good operators that are well above my skill level. If you factor in that you're running a business and you show up every time, that's a huge, huge part of this. That would be my advice: is buy what you need to buy. You will not regret it, and show up well. And you will, been my key to success.
Love it, dude. Great advice. What's your most active social media?
So to get a hold of me, like my main social media page on
Okay.
Instagram, and I post pretty regularly on there, and then that transfers over to Facebook, but I really try to stick to Instagram. And then if you want to get a hold of me, you have questions, or you just want to reach out, Matt@wingwalkerphotos.com would be my email, and I'm pretty quick to respond.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks again, Matt. Appreciate you coming on today and have a good one.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.